Well, hi everybody, welcome to Afterburner. I'm Bill Whittle. This is an iPad. You know, a few days after I picked it up, I thought to myself, this is simply the greatest thing I've ever bought in my life. It's utterly amazing to me. But for a long time now, I've seen in person some very disturbing signs of people, usually young people, usually millennials, showing signs of what can only be called an addiction to these mobile devices. Let's call that psychological addiction. Addiction, remember, is just dependence on a substance or a thing or a behavior that's uncontrollable and therefore just plain bad for you. Let's call that psychological addiction a 3-alarm fire. We'll come back to that in a minute because now there's a 5-alarm fire. According to an article in Britain's Telegraph, the dependence on these devices is no longer psychological. Extended exposure to iPads and smartphones and all the rest are causing actual physiological damage to the brains of children, young children, between 1 and 4 years old. The research is showing the beginnings of a wave that's coming into our society. It's the very tip of an incoming bell curve, and it's very, very serious. These children do not just have an obsessive narcotic addiction to playing with these devices, it's much worse than that. Researchers are discovering that those kids who spend most of their waking hours on these tablets are not able to use toy building blocks. Yep, they simply lack the mechanical dexterity to be able to stack one thing on top of another. Now, when confronted with this deficiency, they further discovered that instead of a 5-alarm panic on the part of the parents, what they received in many cases were expressions of pride in their toddlers' computer skills. In other words, infants can pinch and swipe, but they can't grasp or stack or balance or build anything with simple wooden toy building blocks. So I'll just cut to the chase here. This isn't computer skills we're talking about. This is genuine neurological damage. If those same parents found out that secondhand smoke, let's say, or a pesticide used on apples was preventing their kids from developing the basic motor skills necessary to move, grasp, and arrange objects in the real world, then they'd be out on the streets with torches and pitchforks, and they'd be right to do so. You see, individual development, not to mention the entire evolutionary history of the human species, is in fact a feedback loop between the brain and the hand. Enormous areas of the brain are dedicated to manual manipulation, and for good reason. In fact, this opposable thumb idea and the ability to grasp and manipulate objects requires brain power, a lot of brain power. It literally burns new neural connections that lead to increased brain capacity and led throughout our evolutionary history to ever finer manipulation that burned new neural pathways and so on. So, if the idea that your precious snowflake can't stack and grasp things but can swipe and pinch a tablet surface, if that's not alarming to you, then you need to face the fact that by denying children that essential learning stimulus, you are in fact inducing a form of mental retardation into your children. Now, coupled with the psychological issues we're seeing from an over-reliance on these devices, namely poor verbal and social skills, aggression, obesity, and essentially zero ability to concentrate or pay attention, well, these latest findings ought to make every single parent on the planet view these miraculous things with as much wariness as they would alcohol or nicotine or meth. They're destroying the minds and personality of your kids. And many of you are applauding as it happens. Oh, and by the way, this kind of thing isn't fun for me or other conservatives, you know. We don't like running around with our hair on fire, shouting like lunatics or Luddites. We don't enjoy pointing out the fact that in ever-growing numbers of cases, things are getting worse out there in society, not better. That's why we're conservatives. We want to conserve and preserve what's best in life. Which brings us back to this iPad, which, like a gun or a knife or anything else, is simply an inert object. It's just a tool. I love this iPad. I really do. But I got mine when I was an adult. So how's that different from getting one at birth? Well, for example, as a boy, I rode my bike and I played baseball. I was never overweight. I didn't have anxiety attacks or a lot of allergy problems. I wasn't overscheduled or have play dates that I had to make or miss or any of that. The actual physical act of hitting a baseball or putting a chain back on a bicycle not only let me develop motor skills, they also increased my neurological complexity. And those physical activities gave me time to think, and especially to dream about things. They exercised that most precious and mysterious and human attribute of all, the imagination. I'd imagine what it would be like to fly over the fields that I was riding my bike across. And not having an iPad let me develop a few close friends. Not hundreds of Facebook friends, but 2 or 3 real people whom I could and did depend on for the rest of my life. I had lunch with one of them 2 days ago. We played Little League Baseball together back when we were 10. I've known him for 45 years. I lived in his garage for 6 months when things were tough for me. And I gave him my car when I got a new one when things were tough for him. That's how it's supposed to work. Now, because of those kinds of friends and dreaming and working, I was able to fulfill a lifelong dream and buy an airplane, a real airplane. And now I use this iPad for navigation and flight planning, and it makes my life so much easier and safer and more fun. But I've seen and done things in the sky that most people cannot imagine and I can barely describe. I've had experiences up there where I would come down and say, it's okay if I die now. Transcendental, awesome, amazing things happen to me in the real world. Now, if I'd had this as a child, instead of as an adult, I'd probably be moving an image of an airplane over gumdrops or something, and I'd be gobbling up points for a few hours or a few days or weeks until I got bored and found something new to waste my life on, some new app of some kind, I'm sure. So, as I said, it's not fun to be the person to stand there and to tell you to be careful, to tell you that you're taking away much more than you're giving when you give one of these things, and that the things that you're taking away are not only important, but they are, in fact, the only things that really matter in life. Things like friendship and skill and pride and achievement. Those things are real. They're in here. No one can take those away from me. This, amazing though it is just a piece of glass and plastic and metal. And people, especially young people, deserve much more from life than just this.